Good Monday morning, everyone. Today is September 8th, 2019, and here is today's Monday Morning Minute. Today we will recap last week's readings, we'll also preview this week's readings, and then I'll touch on a few upcoming assignments, including our Critical Response 3, which is due later this week, and our Teaching Metaphor project, which is due next week at the end of week 5. So first, just to recap some of what we talked about last week when we were thinking about the importance of building peer relationships in our classrooms or other educational settings, I wanted to highlight just a few ideas that were floating around our talk of the town. And our first comes from Cassie, who writes, "One of the biggest pieces of evidence Jones & Jones presented for encouraging these relationships was for job readiness skills," found on page 101. Thanks for the page citation, Cassie. Of course, reading and writing are necessary skills to join the workforce, but as the Employment and Training Administration states, thinking skills, interpersonal skills, and personal qualities are all important when joining a career path. So right now, of course, there's a lot of talk nationally about the importance of what is being called college and career readiness. And so we have a lot of course, like technical standards, skill-based standards, etc. But I think Cassie is pointing out what Jones & Jones point out, which is that these interpersonal skills, the social emotional health, is also completely necessary for college and career readiness. And that's something that's really overlooked often. And then we have Rachel, who writes, "To me, the most convincing reason why we should devote time to develop a warm and safe environment for our students was that students will feel valued and respected. If we can create an environment where students feel they are a critical piece of the puzzle, it makes sense consequentially that they feel they are able to contribute, they add value to the world, that they will be successful, and that they can struggle and yet recover." So here Rachel is pointing out, I think really critically, that this social, emotional, and mental aspect of learning and of health is an end in itself, right? So in addition to it being kind of aligned with the broader goals of making sure that our students are ready to enter the workforce, they're also just really important goals as humans, right? And we in the business of education are working to develop humans. And so these pieces, of course, are totally critical to that end goal as well. So coming up this week, we're now kind of moving from thinking about the importance of peer relationships and how to build those to then thinking about the importance of positive parent/caregiver/community/teacher relationships. And so the key question that Jones & Jones bring up in chapter 5 this week is, how can we create trust between teachers and family members? And I note here that they use the term parent, family, and caregiver pretty interchangeably. You can also think about legal guardians as well as this kind of filling the same sort of role. And already they mention that a lot of teachers, and myself certainly included the first few years when I was in the classroom, are really apprehensive to reach out to parents. Many teachers find it really difficult to establish those bonds. However, we know, and once again, they present a really strong research-based case that this is actually critical to our students' success. And so the first piece of advice that they give, and I've just kind of incorporated a few different kind of nuggets of wisdom that I thought were really helpful from this chapter. But they mention the importance of listening as opposed to just telling. So kind of approaching these conversations and these interactions with caregivers from a position of respect and humility, and recognizing that the picture that we see of students in the classroom or in another educational setting is really only part of the whole, right? And we can learn a whole lot by inviting parents to inform us of the part of the picture that we don't see. They also begin the chapter with this fabulous quote from Joyce Epstein, who says, "The way schools care about children is reflected in the way schools care about the children's families." And this struck me as I read it because it occurred to me that it seems a bit disingenuous to profess to love children and to care about their future, but then to kind of shut their parents out, or to just, in some cases, throw your hands up and say, well, I can't work with this parent or these parents, right? Epstein here is really reminding us that those two are linked. How can we fully care about the development and health of a child if we don't also truly care about weaving in their parents or caregivers into all major decisions that are being made about their child's future. And here, again, this third bullet point is kind of stemming from their research base, where they mention that even though it does take a lot of time and effort to reach out to parents, especially if you're in the secondary situation where you have literally hundreds of parents to reach out to, they do mention that a reasonable investment of time can be associated with significant gains, both academically and socially for students. Then I included just a 2-minute video of Victoria Purcell Gates, who's a scholar. She's out of the University of British Columbia. Her major focus in terms of her scholarship is on early literacy. But here she's talking about the importance of, as she says, a teacher going out to meet the parents rather than, only inviting the parents in. And we see that in the Jones and Jones chapter, that is really difficult for some parents, right, who are working multiple jobs, who can't take time off during the workday to come to a conference. So we as teachers need to go out into the community. And I think that she makes a compelling case for that. And then finally, I just wanted to bring up this idea of funds of knowledge. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with this. They touch on it super briefly in the Jones and Jones text, but essentially this is a concept that has been forwarded, and it's really a response to what people call a deficit mindset. So a deficit mindset is kind of viewing our students in terms of what they lack. So, they lack support, quote unquote, at home. They lack support in terms of their development. They lack basic reading skills, right? These are things that it can be easy to focus on in the context of a classroom. And so what Moll, Amonte, and Gonzalez have come up with, this idea of funds of knowledge, is actually really turning the tables. And so they say, actually, every single student that we have comes with a fund of knowledge. And this knowledge is wide-ranging. This knowledge is usually not acknowledged within the school, but it includes things like their family. It includes things like their community and the knowledge base that has been accrued as a result of lived experience. And so they believe if we really tap into these funds of knowledge in our classroom, then we can kind of become in better alignment with what the student experiences outside of class. We can make sure that their whole self is welcomed in the classroom. It's not something that they have to shed the moment they walk through the door. So if you're interested, there's a book. It's called Funds of Knowledge, and you can totally check it out. There's also a ton of articles that you can access through the ISU libraries. Just type in Funds of Knowledge and you'll see a lot. It's a really promising and I would say humane way of looking at our relationships with students and families. All right, so I wanted to touch briefly on our upcoming assignment. This is going to be due at the end of next week, so September 22nd. And this is our teaching metaphor project. It's our first major assignment of the semester. So I have it pulled up on Blackboard, and you can access it just by going to this assignments tab here. That might be the easiest way. And here I have our description. And so this assignment kind of takes off from the field of cognitive linguistics. If you're at all interested in this kind of stuff, you can look up Lakoff and Johnson, Words We Live By. They're kind of the pioneers of this thinking. And they basically say that we all use conceptual metaphors all the time. We don't even realize that we're speaking metaphorically, and yet we are. And it's important for us to think about the metaphors that we use because they actually have a really big impact on how we see ourselves and how we see the world. So if we can kind of, think through how we're organizing our lives, we can improve them. And so what I'm asking you all to do is to come up with a metaphor that describes your own view of teaching and or learning. And given that we have people in a range of different fields, not simply classroom teachers, you can think about this as a metaphor project to describe your own particular role, whatever it might be, in your particular context. So that might seem really simple, but I've given you some prompts here that I want you to both think about and then write about. So one thing, for instance, you should consider is whether your metaphor is framing teaching positively or negatively. Are there positive connotations to your metaphor? Are there negative connotations? And in either case, does it align with how you really feel about teaching and learning? Think about how you as a teacher are positioned in this metaphor, and also think about how students, and I would say families, are positioned. Does this positioning give them any agency, right? Is agency something that you think students and families should have? In that case, it should be accounted for in whatever metaphor you select. I also, in kind of thinking about the broader theme of classroom management, what does the metaphor that you choose suggest about how you intend to approach conflicts in your work? And also, what does your metaphor suggest is the goal of education? So I have a counterexample here that I came up with. And again, this is a counterexample, so this is maybe what not to do. And I have some examples of what you might think of, and I'll share those with you in just a bit. But so if someone said teaching is putting out fires, already we have a negative connotation, right? We also have the teacher as the person in charge. We have students and families as fires, right? That's not really agentic at all. It also suggests, as I write here, that conflict resolution in this, if you hold this metaphor of teaching, you might see it as very top down. I'm the teacher. I'm the only one who can put out these fires. I'm not taking any suggestions about how to put out the fires. I'm just taking care of it, right? It's very kind of individualistic. And also, this metaphor suggests that the goal of education is just to keep things under control, right? It's not about any sort of growth or progress, right? It's just like managing an extreme situation. So imagine if you have that metaphor and you approach the classroom this way, how it might actually influence your actions day to day, right? And your interactions with parents and caregivers. So again, that's a counterexample. And I should have put the real examples here. That's an organizational flaw that I will correct. So put a pin in the positive examples briefly. But what I'm asking you to do with your metaphor is to create a visual essay that will explain your metaphor, and please also include some images. So how'd you come to this metaphor? Make sure to address all these questions up here. And it can be very multimodal if you want. So you can write it just in like a Word document. You can also use Prezi or PowerPoint. You can use Google Slides, any other visual format that makes sense to you. You can put together a video if you'd like. That's totally cool. So it can be super multimodal. It can also just kind of be a Word document with pictures. If that's kind of your comfort zone, that's totally fine. So here are the just kind of bare bones requirements. Please do incorporate 3 to 5 readings from our course. These can be multiple chapters from our textbooks. That's fine. But again, please make sure that you have correct in-text citations as well as a reference page. APA format is probably best. That's what our discipline uses and most of the social sciences use. But if you are, an MLA diehard and you just use that consistently, that's totally fine too. Okay, so here down, buried at the bottom, are the examples of like kind of positive teaching metaphors for your consideration. So if you follow this link, you'll be brought to this page, oops, at the very top. And then you're just gonna have to scroll down a little bit. It starts actually, I think, the 3rd video. So here is Melody, and she's talking about her metaphor for teaching, which involves tailoring, and she kind of explains that. And then we have Marcos here, who describes teaching as a greenhouse. And so these are some positive examples to check out if you kind of want to get your juices flowing and thinking creatively about your metaphor. But there are some resources. Okay, so finally, for this week, we have our 3rd critical response due. And again, the initial post will be due on Thursday, and our 2 follow-up posts will be due on Sunday. And so in addition, if, again, your comfort zone is just kind of like using this space to think critically and to kind of go where your mind wants to go with respect to the content of this week's readings, that's great. Otherwise, here is a question for you. I just want you to think of a situation in which you've been or imagine being confronted by an upset parent or caregiver, and how